Hey everyone, welcome to Island Uplift's history class. Today is episode 6 in the history class, and today we will be looking at the voyages of Christopher Columbus. Now, when looking at this topic, there are three main objectives that we want to cover from the CSEC Caribbean History syllabus. The first objective, we want to be able to look at the events that occurred in each of Christopher Columbus's 4 voyages to the Caribbean. Then we want to take a brief look at the rivalry between Spain and Portugal. And finally, we want to take another brief look at the legacy of Christopher Columbus. So let's get into it. So on August 3rd, 1492, Christopher Columbus, along with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta, as well as 92 crewmen, or some sources would say 94 crewmen, sailed from Palos, Spain, arrived in the Canary Islands, and finally on October 12th, 1492, they arrived in the Caribbean. They arrived at an island called Guanahani, and it was called Guanahani by the local Taino people. However, Christopher Columbus himself eventually called it San Salvador. All right. Now, the journey from Palos, Spain to Guanahani, it took Columbus and his crewmen 71 days to make. Now, Columbus, when he sailed with 2 brothers, Martin and Vicente Pizon, and each of them acted as a captain for each of the ships that they sailed. We want to look at the first voyage of Christopher Columbus, which occurred from 1492 to 1493. So here we have a map of the Bahamas, and it has been determined that Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean would have occurred on an island that is popularly known today as San Salvador in the Bahamian archipelago. Columbus would have traveled from the Canary Islands, and he would have landed on this island, and he would have heard the Taino people there referring to it as Guanahani. Of course, he changed the name to San Salvador. All right. There is some debate about this, because there are some people who actually say that Samana Cay, and you could see it there, Samana Cay could have also possibly been the first place that he made a landing. However, it seems that most evidence actually surrounds modern-day San Salvador right here. All right. Now, upon his landing, Columbus and his men, they met the natives. And these natives, and if you remember from episode 3, these natives would have been known as Western Taino, right? The Western Taino people groups. But Columbus and his men referred to them as Indians because they thought, the Europeans, the Spanish thought that they had reached India. Now, the Spanish called these people groups Lucayos, meaning people of the islands. Okay. All right. So that is why a lot of times the Taino people groups in the Bahamas are sometimes referred to as the Lucayan Taino or the Lucayos people. All right. Now, upon seeing Columbus and his men, and you could imagine how amazing this thing was for the Taino, because they're seeing men, even their complexion, because obviously these men would have been Caucasian. So the Taino people group see these Caucasian men coming, it probably would have baffled their minds, because they've never seen men like this before with the ships they had and so on. So they went to meet Columbus. Some of them swam, some of them used the canoes. Of course, some of them would have waited on the beach, right? And when the Spanish came on shore, the Taino offered them parrots. I almost said Spanish parrots, right? They offered them parrots. They offered them cotton threads wrapped in darts, and they offered them different types of skins. And all of this was done in an act of trade. Now, when you look at what the Spanish gave them in return, what Columbus and his men gave them in return, you realize Columbus and the Spanish didn't come to trade. They came to explore and conquer, right? So I could imagine somebody giving me these precious stuff, and I am just scurrying around the place looking for some random stuff to give them to say, okay, yeah, here, we're trading. So Columbus and his men gave them red caps, green glass beads, brass rings, and small bells. Right. And the people were intrigued by these things. All right. We would see them as useless, but they were intrigued by these things because they never really saw things like this before. Now, after exchanging the different trinkets, Columbus renamed the island San Salvador instead of Guanahani. And he took 6 of the local Taino people with him to teach them Spanish. This was a very strategic move done by Columbus. He took 6 of the local Taino people and he taught them Spanish so that they could serve as interpreters as the crew sailed further into the islands. Now, this was some serious intuition by Christopher Columbus here, because this would have helped him out to an extent as he kept traveling. But we also know how this story would really end up as well, all right? So anyway, so they keep traveling throughout the Bahamian Islands. They make several stops on several different islands. They're just navigating. Remember that, yes, they have certain things they're looking for. The key thing that the Spanish are looking for, they're looking for a pathway to India. They're looking for somewhere that's going to guide them directly to India. And at this moment, they really thought they were there. All right. But they're exploring. And I think by now they would have realized that there seems to be some islands that they are navigating around and within. Right. But they still believe they're close to India or they're here. Then they arrive at Cuba. And Columbus, upon arriving at this landmass, he named it, because you realize Europeans have this custom where they just want to name stuff. When they reach somewhere, they just name it. All right. Columbus names it Juana, after Prince Juan of Spain. Juana. Now, actually, Columbus really believed that he had reached mainland Asia when he got to Cuba. He really believed this. Remember, he didn't have a map. This was a heavily unexplored area by Europeans. Other people groups would have explored this, and we're going to look at this much later in the future. All right. But Columbus, and he was really the first Europeans to really explore this area. And they really thought that they were looking at India, because they didn't even think that there could be landmasses in the West before even reaching Asia. All right. So they began exploring the northern coast of Cuba. They began going north, then they go back down to the southeast. They're still along the northern coast. Now, something interesting happens, because remember, Columbus and his men were going through the Bahamas and they were going across the northern coast of Cuba. But guess what? They weren't finding anything. Nothing. They weren't finding anything. No gold, nothing. All right. So remember, there were 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. The crew members of the Pinta, which were led by Martin Pinzon, they got tired. All right. They got tired of this constant sailing without attaining anything or attaining much. I mean, they got some parrots, some beads, some cotton. They're looking for gold. And the primary thing is a pathway to India, but they also want some gold. They also want some spices. They also want some things that they would deem valuable. So the Pinta decided to break off from the main entourage and do their own thing. So as you can see indicated right here by the little black arrow, they decided to sail a bit northeast. All right. And they decided to sail that way now to see if they could find gold. Now, this meant that Columbus was just left with the Santa Maria and the Nina. So he moved from having 3 ships to having just 2 ships. All right, so let's progress. Now, Columbus, along with the Santa Maria and the Nina, they continue exploring the coast of Cuba. They even went back up briefly into the Bahamas, came back down into Cuba. They kept going along the coast of Cuba because they're trying to catch their bearings, and they're trying to see, what is this place? What is this place? And remember, they would have been meeting people groups along the way, and they would have had those Taino people groups that they got from Guanahani, who were helping them now in translating, because they were also helping those Taino to learn the Spanish language. All right. Then they ended up leaving Cuba, and they crossed now what we call the Windward Passage to go over now to Hispaniola. And this is going to be the beginning of a crazy set of events. All right, so let's get ready for this. All right, so Columbus is going over now to Hispaniola. But something happens. Remember, he had 2 ships, the Santa Maria and the Nina. Now, both of them sailed across the Windward Passage, which is between Cuba and Hispaniola. But while crossing, the Santa Maria sailed into a coral reef. And as a result, it got seriously damaged. Now, most of the crew of the Santa Maria, they decided to stay back to help repair the damages that were done on the ship because it sailed into a coral reef. And while they stayed back to repair the ship, Columbus continued exploring the northern coast of Hispaniola with the Nina. So now he has just one ship. Remember the Pentagon and its business. The Pentagon. All right? Pentagon somewhere. They don't even know where. The Pentagon somewhere. The Santa Maria is badly damaged. They're trying to repair this thing. And the Nina is the only thing he has left. So he jumps on the Nina. He sails with the Nina. They're now exploring the northern coast of Hispaniola. Now, upon reaching the coast of Hispaniola, they met various Taino groups. And we would have learned in episode 3 that Hispaniola probably had the largest numbers of Taino people groups. And Columbus and his men befriended a local cacique, a local Taino chief by the name of Guacanagari. So they continue exploring, and as they travel along the northern coast, it was recorded that while traveling, Columbus saw an island in the distance, and he saw mist rising around the island, but he saw the top of it. And he stated that it looks like a turtle shell. It looks like a turtle shell. So as a result now, he said, I'm going to call that island Tortuga, which is Spanish for turtle. All right. Now, Tortuga is something that we will be touching on in the near future, because very soon, actually, very, very soon, because Tortuga was actually one of what we call the piracy havens in the Caribbean, meaning it was one of those places that pirates really found refuge in and where they would base a lot of their operations from and so on. Right. If you have watched Pirates of the Caribbean, especially the first and the second movies, you would hear that Tortuga is mentioned frequently, especially by Jack Sparrow. All right, so you can check it out. Then Columbus and his men, after traveling further along the coast, they decided to settle in an area because remember, they were just exploring. For all this time, they were exploring until they decided, you know what? Maybe we should form a settlement. Let's see how this goes. So they arrive at an area in the month of December 1492, and they call the area La Navidad, referring to the nativity because it was Christmas time. All right. So they wanted to build a settlement. So what were they going to do? If you're going to build a settlement, you can't just go to an empty space and say, I'm going to build a settlement, and then you never actually build something. They needed building material. So what Columbus did is that with the help of the same cacique that he met, Guacanagari, his men carried lumber from the wreckage of the Santa Maria to build a fort at La Navidad. Now, basically, they say, we're not going to try to repair the ship again. Let's just use it to build a fort. So they stripped the ship apart and used the lumber to build a fort, which marked the beginning of a settlement. All right. This Taino group was led by Guacanagari, helped them. Now, this is an important thing to consider. They helped these men. Okay. They were helped. And when Columbus, because remember, Columbus, he wants to explore. He's trying to find this route to India. So he's not going to stay here for long. So what happened is 40 of his crewmen decided to stay and live in La Navidad permanently so that they could build the settlement more and so on. So while they did that now, Columbus set sail again along the coast of Hispaniola, and he left La Navidad on January 4th, 1493. They probably had a wonderful Christmas. All right. And this seems like a beautiful moment because we see the Spanish and the Taino working hand in hand. Everything seems to be going well. It seems to be a beautiful thing. But we're going to see that things are about to get very dark. Very, very dark. All right. Interestingly, 2 days after he left La Navidad on January 6, 1493, the Nina, because remember the Santa Maria, they used it to build a fort at La Navidad. So he only had the Nina now. The Pinta met them up. All right. They met up with them along the coast of Hispaniola. And I guess they would have told them about about the exploration and how it really wasn't successful and so on. But no, both of them continued on a journey because remember, the Pinta would have left the entourage here along the coast of Cuba. And it's estimated that the Pinta would have taken this journey that you see on your map. Now, remember, these fellas didn't know the geography of this region. So for us now, it'd be like, you're looking for gold? Really? There? But for them, they didn't know. They didn't know what they were going to encounter. And for 7 weeks, they were searching through the Bahamian Islands until they just ended up being navigated and navigating themselves. I say being navigated because remember, ocean currents and trade winds would have also helped them with their navigation. It led them right back to Hispaniola. And thankfully, they were able to join up with Christopher Columbus at Hispaniola. All right. So the Pinta rejoins them, which means that Columbus now has 2 ships again, the Nina and the Pinta. And they travel until they reach a bay area, a huge bay area, which is popularly known today as Samana Bay. And then from Samana Bay, they travel back to the Azores. And then Columbus and his men with the 2 ships travel to the Azores from Hispaniola. Then they travel over to Lisbon, Portugal. And finally, they go right back to Palos, Spain. And on March 13, 1493, Columbus, the Nina, the Pinta, the Taino people who came with him as well, and his crewmen, they came in, I'm sure they felt triumphant. All right. And they came in Palos, Spain, and it caused an uproar. It caused an uproar naturally, because this is the first time Europeans had done this, visiting that region. All right. And this marked the completion of Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Caribbean region. Now, concerning his voyage to the Caribbean region, he returned with just the Nina and the Pinta. Remember, the Santa Maria was used to build the fort at La Navidad. All right. Now, along with his Spanish crew members, he returned with 9 Taino members who were trained as translators. All right. Now, here's the sad thing. Columbus was really still calling these people Indians. You know why? Because, believe it or not, he still thought he actually reached India. At this point, he really still thought he did. And then now he also returned with parrots with gold. So he had some jewelry and fragments of gold and so on, cotton and other items. So it gave the idea that there was some serious prosperity in this region. So it had to be, listen, they really reach India. They really reach Asia. Sounds good. Sounds good. Columbus then had to travel to Barcelona, Spain in April 1493, which is about a month after his return, because he had to meet with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. They held court there, so they had all their legal and regal duties that they were issuing and conducting there from the court in Barcelona. All right. And King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were elated because I'm sure they were very skeptical, but they say, yes, he actually do something. Yes, he actually do something. So they bestowed upon him the title, and I kid you not, this is the title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy and Governor of the Islands that he had discovered in the Indies. That is the actual name of the title. Very long title. But I guess you can summarize it to say Admiral and Viceroy and probably Governor. Now, after Columbus met with Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, something interesting happened, because his success, I guess you can say success, in reaching the Caribbean and coming back with different people and the parrots and the gold and so on, it sparked a certain initiative from the case of the Spanish. All right. And that is where we're going to look now at Spain and Portugal very briefly, right? So after Columbus's return from his first voyage, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they applied to the Pope, who was known as Pope Alexander VII at that time, and they applied to him for exclusive rights to all the lands that were found. All right. Now check this out. They called these lands the Indies because they really thought that they had found India. Now Pope Alexander, here's the thing, he loved the idea. Because 2 reasons. He was born in Spain, so he was Spanish, all right? He was actually installed as the Pope around the same time that Columbus left on his first voyage, which was in 1492. And along with being Spanish, he was very elated. He was still elated at how King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella kicked out the Moors out of Granada, Spain. Now, remember, if you don't know what I'm talking about, refer to episode 5 where we spoke about the Moors and how they would have overcome and been victorious over the Moors that were occupying southern Spain. All right. So the Pope Alexander VII, he made an edict, and the edict was called a papal bull. All right, it's a weird name. But a papal bull is basically an edict that was made by the Pope in relation to land issues and land ownership and property ownership and so on, and property acquisition and so on. So he made a papal bull that was called the Intercestora, and it was issued in May 1493, just about 2 months after Columbus's arrival from his first voyage. And this edict, or this bull, it conferred all rights to Spain. So it meant that the Pope was saying, listen, this is an edict. Bam! I'm stamping it down. Any lands that Spain finds in this Western Hemisphere, it belongs to them. All right? But there was a problem. Sounds straightforward, but there was a problem. And the problem was with Portugal. Now, the Portuguese considered this new edict as infringing upon their rights, especially concerning lands that they found south of the Canary Islands. And when we say lands south of the Canary Islands, we're really talking about Africa here. Because remember, the Portuguese were navigating the African continent. Remember that from episode 5, right? And all lands south of the Canary Islands were actually conferred to Portugal in an edict that was instituted about 12 years prior in 1481. The King of Portugal at that time, King John II, he argued that this edict in 1481, it allowed Portugal to claim everything south of the Canary Islands latitude, no matter how far east or west they were. So basically, he's saying the whole southern hemisphere really belongs to Portugal, even if Spain finds the lands. So as a result, the king bypassed the Pope's edict, and he negotiated directly with King Ferdinand and Isabella and Queen Isabella. All right. And the Portuguese concerned, because remember, they were trying to navigate to Asia. So they circumnavigated around Africa to try to get to Asia. That was their real concern. They say, okay, you know what? Let's try to settle something here. Then both countries, both Spain and Portugal, they came to an agreement, and they created a line of longitude that was 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, where it is right off the coast of Africa there. And all discoveries made east of the line would belong to Portugal, and all discoveries made west of the line would belong to Spain. So Africa and Asia were therefore seen as belonging to Portugal, right? And the Americas, or what they would refer to as the New World, they were referred to as being owned or belonging to Spain. All right. Now, this edict became known as the very famous Treaty of Tordesillas, and it was signed on June 7, 1494 in Tordesillas, Spain. Now, this is a visual representation of this line that was drawn. Now, this line, it actually goes all the way around to the Pacific region. So if you are looking at it, you also should have been seeing the line coming over on the right-hand side of your screen, and it would have gone through part of Australia there. All right. But basically, we're seeing here that it basically the Western Hemisphere belonged to Spain, the Eastern Hemisphere belonged to Portugal. Although you can see Portugal would have gotten a bigger chunk of the deal here. Now we come to the second voyage of Christopher Columbus from 1493 to 1496. Now, 7 months after his return, Columbus set sail again for the islands in September 1493. Now, this was mandated by the king and the queen because their intention was for Columbus to engage in formally claiming the lands in the name of Spain, as well as commencing serious settlements. Now, this is 1493, which means that the Treaty of Tordesillas was that we just spoke about. It had not been instituted fully as yet, but it would have been instituted. All right. So Columbus carried with him 17 ships with 1,500 men who were known as conquistadors. Now, conquistadors refers to a Spanish soldier. A conquistador is a Spanish soldier. And these men would have actually fought in the war against the Moors in 1492, in January 1492. And well, since they would have completed that, I guess they wanted a sense of adventure. They wanted something to do. So they joined Christopher Columbus in this endeavor. It was a huge thing, because along with soldiers, he carried with him a medical doctor. He carried with him a map maker or a cartographer. And he carried with him several members of the clergy, because along with looking for a path to India, they were also trying to spread the message of Christianity to the various places that they meet, all right? And they carried livestock with them, horses, cattle, sheep, goats, and poultry. And this one is going to impact the history of the region. They carried with them sugarcane from the Canary Islands. And we will be touching, we will be touching on that. Or once you say sugarcane, you're basically talking about history right there. Now, this marked the beginning of Christopher Columbus's second voyage to the Caribbean region. So he's traveling once again from Palos, Spain. He travels to the Canary Islands, and then on November 3rd, 1493, he arrives back at the Caribbean region. Now, this time, instead of Bahamas, he sails further south and arrives at the island that we know today as Dominica. Now, he named the island Dominica after the Spanish word for Sunday, the first day of the week, all right? So he arrives at Dominica, and then from Dominica, he travels to Guadeloupe. Now, while Columbus and the conquistadors got at Dominica, they actually were delayed by 6 days because they got lost in the jungles of Dominica. Now, interestingly, this was also a momentous occasion where the Europeans had their very first encounter, because remember, a year before, in 1492, they had an encounter with the Taino. But this was now their first encounter with the presence of the Kalinago people groups. And the Kalinago people groups had actually recently come into the Caribbean themselves. As a matter of fact, the Kalinago people groups came into the Caribbean about 40 to 50 years before Columbus arrived. So they are now traveling to Guadeloupe, and they're heading now. The aim is to get back to La Navidad. Everything is going nice and wonderful. I'm sure Christopher Columbus is on a high horse right now. He's feeling good. So he encounters other islands, the islands that we know as Montserrat, Antigua, Redonda, St. Christopher, also known as St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Eustatius, Saba, Santa Cruz, and the Virgin Islands. He gets to Puerto Rico. He meets another group of Taino people there. They were called the Borinquian. He's meeting people. I'm sure he's feeling good. And finally, on November 27th, 1493, Columbus arrives at La Navidad. It sounds like it's gonna be a triumphant arrival, but guess what? There was no La Navidad when they got there. Oh, whoa! There was no La Navidad. Like, didn't we build a settlement here? The settlement had disappeared. Actually, better word to use is not disappeared. The settlement was destroyed. All right. You see, you remember Chief Wakanagari, all right, the chief who they befriended in their first voyage. He was left in charge of the settlement, really, along with the 40 men who volunteered to stay back to help build the fort. But the chief said that another chief by the name of Kaunabo, and he would have ruled in the southern region of the island, he reacted to aggression that was shown to the Taino by the Spanish. Now, what happened is that they were claiming that the Spanish were going and they were stealing from the Taino and they were raping their women. And there was heavy evidence to show that this really was the truth. All right. Now, Columbus would have instructed the men not to do that before he left, but they did that. And the Taino therefore retaliated by killing all the Spanish men, and they retaliated by destroying La Navidad. Oh. So Columbus now, this is an interesting moment. Let's look at this moment for a moment. A moment for a moment. Columbus has an opportunity now to really set a good example of himself. He has an opportunity to turn this negative situation around. So if you have an opportunity like this, and think about the opportunities in your own life, you use them properly. But guess what he did? He made a stupid choice, a real stupid choice, a choice that was gonna cast a really dark shadow on Caribbean history. Columbus decided to place not some, all the blame on the Taino. And his incentive was, well, listen, the Spanish guys are dead. My Spaniards are dead. Oh my Lord. You see what's going on here? So as a result, he began massacring the Taino on the island. And this marked the beginning of what we know as the Taino genocide. And we'll be touching on this more in future episodes, all right? Now, this also marked the beginning of a series of downward spiraling events which would damage Columbus's administrative powers and his reputation, for centuries to come. Now, Columbus had some administrative woes. Now, along with massacring the Taino, he sent some back to Spain as slaves as a form of punishment. Queen Isabella didn't like it. She sent them back. Then in Hispaniola, the Spanish settlers were unhappy for finding little to no gold. So they mutinied. They formed a mutiny against Columbus. All right. Now he overcame the mutiny, right? And they were trying to have a mutiny when he had placed them to build another settlement. So La Navidad was down. So they wanted to build another settlement in the name of Queen Isabella, but they formed a mutiny against him. They revolted against him, but he was able to put it down. Then Columbus did a stupid thing, right? He left his brother, Diego, in charge of Hispaniola while he continued discovering. Now, this move sparked a series of horrific events which led to, yes, the extermination of the Taino people groups on the island. So La Navidad was no more. Gone. Instead, they developed a settlement, called Isabella, in the name of Queen Isabella. Now, Columbus continued exploring. He travels along the southern coast of Cuba, and interestingly, he's still thinking that Cuba is mainland Asia, right? I was going to say China, but So he makes a U-turn when he reaches western Cuba. He travels along the coast again, and he now starts sailing south to an island that he calls Santiago, that we today call Jamaica. All right. And Jamaica comes from an Arawakan word, Jamaica, which means land of wood and water. That's why Jamaica usually adopts that slogan, land of wood and water. And Columbus would have made, a zigzaggy kind of journey in between Cuba and Jamaica. And then finally, he would travel along the southern coast of Jamaica, where he would go right back to Isabella. Now, when he travels back to Isabella, the settlement, right? Along the way, he would have also established a settlement south in Hispaniola that was called Santo Domingo, a settlement that exists to this day because Santo Domingo is the capital city of the Dominican Republic. All right. Now, when Columbus arrived back at Isabella, he was faced with a Taino attack that involved a collaborative effort of almost all the caciques in the island except his good friend Wakanagari. All right. Now, despite there being thousands of Taino warriors, he had 200 men with him and they overcame them. And I think we know why. Columbus and the Spanish, obviously, they had handguns and they also had their swords. So they would have overcome the Taino very easily, who probably had their spears, their bows, their arrows, etc. All right. Now, Columbus began massacring and enslaving even more Taino people. As a matter of fact, he even ended up sending 500 of them back to Spain as slaves. But once again, Isabella frowned on this. She didn't really like that kind of thing. All right. She didn't really like that. Columbus instituted that and here he's getting real strict now because remember, the destruction of La Navidad really hurt him. So Columbus instituted that all Taino males over 14 years old were forced to labor as slaves for the Spanish, or if not, they had to pay a tribute of half an ounce of gold or 25 pounds of cotton every 3 months. And for the time, and trust me, that was a lot. That was a lot. And you might say, you know what, because I even used a word just now saying that Columbus was hurt, but still, the drastic measures that he put in place just because, all it took was really trying to understand the situation properly and approaching it diplomatically. But no, he decided to go with force. Now, reports of Columbus's poor management, they were taken back to Spain. And a guy by the name of Juan de Fonseca, right, Juan de Fonseca, who was the controller of the settlement of the Indies, he responded to the claims by authorizing someone called Juan Aguado, a former member of the royal household, to be sent to Hispaniola in August of 1495 to investigate and report on the situation that was going on there. The report was not pretty for Columbus, and as a result of that, Columbus left for Spain from Isabella in June 1496. All right, and this, of course, marked the end of his second voyage. We have a little interjection here. While the Spanish were busy with all the craziness with Columbus, they were hopeful that he would make a discovery, but there was also someone else who was keeping a close eye on Columbus: Portugal. Now, the Portuguese, you remember from episode 5, we looked at how the Portuguese circumnavigated the western coast of Africa. And by 1488, which is 4 years before Columbus left on his journey to go to the Caribbean, but he thought he was going to India, but he ended up in the Caribbean. In 1488, the Portuguese arrived at the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa, and they realized there is a possibility we could reach India this way. All right, we could reach India this way. Now, in 1497, they were looking at Columbus, and Columbus had just come back from his second voyage. And we saw the Fourth Voyage was cool, I guess. Second Voyage, there was a bit of catastrophe there, right? And the Portuguese concluded on the look that, yeah, boy, he wasn't able to reach India by sailing west. So what they did now, they say, you know what? Let we get the ball rolling with this thing, all right? The Spanish seem like it's not working out, so let we do this thing. So they sent a navigator by the name of Don Vasco da Gama. And they sent him with 4 ships to see what he can do by sailing south. Not sailing west, but sailing south. All right? So Vasco da Gama left Lisbon, Portugal, and he circumnavigated the western coast of the African continent until he arrived once again at the Cape of Good Hope. And I said once again, meaning that a Portuguese captain before him had reached there, Captain Bartholomew, in 1488. All right. So he arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, and then he continued going around the coast of southern Africa until he began circumnavigating the eastern coast of the African continent. This would have taken him a while. He passed all those lands, all the lands of Tanzania and Kenya, and of course, I talking about the modern names, Somalia. And now, upon reaching the Horn of Africa, he ventured out into the northeast, and on May 20th, 1498, Vasco da Gama arrived at Calicut in India. So he found an alternate route to India. Remember why these fellas are looking for alternative routes to India. Remember, it was the Ottoman Empire who were having a blockade of the Middle East and of this Middle East and Turkish area here, of this Asia Minor, Middle East, Turkish area, and as well as the formerly Persian area. They had a blockade there. So Europe had difficulty traveling in this direction. You can also refer to episode 5 for more information on that, all right? So Vasco da Gama arrives at Calicut. The Europeans now had access to the Indian continent with a different route than they had before, all right? Now we come back to Christopher Columbus, and we're looking at the third voyage from 1498 to 1500. Now, Christopher Columbus, he found it difficult to recruit enough men because the men realized, what? Them fellas ain't finding no gold. They ain't finding nothing in these islands. And there was rumors going around that the islands were unhealthy. Diseases, the living conditions, etc. It was poor. That's what they were saying. All right? So he ended up recruiting criminals, convicts, to make up the crew. All right, so he sailed on May 30th, 1498, which Fun fact, that's just 10 days after Vasco da Gama arrives at India. Remember, he's still searching for India, but 10 days before this, Vasco da Gama arrived at India. Oh, Lord. Anyway, he sails from Palos, Spain, but he sails further south. He doesn't go to the Azores or to the Canary Islands. He goes straight for Cape Verde, which is interestingly Portuguese territory, but he makes dock there. And he travels even further south than he did in his third voyage, and he ends up at the island we know as Trinidad. Now, this is where many persons would say that he named it Trinidad after seeing the Trinity Mountains. And of course, it reminded him or inspired him of the Holy Trinity, hence the name Trinidad. All right. Now, it was during his third voyage that it became clear to Columbus that he had indeed not found India, China, or Asia for that matter. So he began to realize more and more that he had found new unknown lands, or at least unknown to Europeans. But finding new lands, even in finding new lands, he still really desired to still find India and China. Although remember, Vasco da Gama was already in India by this time, right? But he arrived in Trinidad in July 1498. And when he arrived in Trinidad, he sailed South Trinidad, and he turned around into the Gulf of Paria through an area called the Serpent's Mouth, all right? He establishes some trade with the local indigenous people groups who are there. And then he leaves Trinidad via an area called the Dragon's Mouth, all right? And he arrives at the island known as Margarita, which is just north of Venezuela here, all right? Then he sails to the northwest of Margarita, and his navigation is pretty good here. He sails directly to Hispaniola, all right? And he reaches there in a quick time compared to before. And then he sails to the sea. Remember, we spoke about Santo Domingo. He then sails to the community known as Santo Domingo. Now, on Hispaniola, the situation was still bad. Taino attacks were being dealt with, but the Taino themselves, and this was really sad, the Taino themselves were being exploited by the Spanish settlers. Now, many settlers, including mainly the Spanish and the Taino, they died from various types of diseases, and we will touch on this in our next episode, all right? And the man whom Christopher Columbus had appointed as Chief Justice of the island, Francisco Roldan, he was leading a rebellion against Christopher Columbus. So a courtier, so somebody else now had to come. A guy by the name of Francisco de Bobadilla. He was sent by the crown to arrest Christopher Columbus and his brothers, Diego and Bartholomew. They were not doing proper administrative duties, so they were gonna, they weren't just gonna tell him, come back home. They won't say, listen, we're gonna arrest you. All right, so he arrested them, and they sailed back to Spain in September of in the year 1500. I tell you, what a way to start off a new century, right in the year 1500, bam. And then we get now to the fourth and final voyage of Christopher Columbus. Now, for his fourth and final voyage, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, they were persuaded by Columbus to invest in the Fourth Voyage. He assured them that he knew the maritime routes well, and now he was certain that he could find a passage to the east, to China, India, beyond the island. So now he realized, okay, this is not India, but I can find India. This is not China, but I can find China. All right. Now, he was pardoned from his imprisonment just 6 weeks after his initial arrival from his third voyage, and he was therefore allowed to spearhead the voyage, making one promise. This was the one thing he wasn't supposed to do. He was not supposed to step foot on Hispaniola ever again. All right? Now, the Spanish crown had placed a guy by the name of Don Nicolas de Ovando as governor and supreme justice of all the islands Christopher Columbus encountered. Not just Hispaniola, but Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas, the Lesser Antilles, etc. All right. Now, this meant that Columbus' previous title of viceroy, as well as all his rights and privileges, they were now suspended. And his only task was now to solely find an alternate route to the east. Just find the route and done. So he sailed with 4 ships, and he entered the Caribbean region for the last time on June 15th, 1502. Now, this time in arriving at the Caribbean region, he arrives at Dominica again, but not making landfall at Dominica. Instead, he sails between that passage between Martinique and Dominica. And then he travels along the Leeward Islands, along the southern coast of Puerto Rico, and he arrives once again at Santo Domingo. Now, this should set a light bulb in your head, or this should set a red flag rather, because he's at Santo Domingo. He's not supposed to be there. They told him not to be there. However, what happened? He went to Santo Domingo to seek assistance in fixing one of his ships and to escape an incoming, there it is, an incoming hurricane. Now check this out. Governor Ovando, he refused to help Columbus. And Columbus didn't just ask for help. Columbus actually wanted to give him help. Columbus was warning him of the incoming hurricane. But Governor Ovando didn't listen to Columbus. So what Columbus did, Columbus knew the geography of Hispaniola better. So he sailed to a more sheltered region along the southern coast of the island, while Governor Ovando did nothing. However, what happened? When the hurricane hit, 20 of Governor Ovando's ships were destroyed and 500 of his men died. You should have listened to Columbus. All right. So anyway, the hurricane is moving away from Hispaniola. And as it moves and dissipates, Columbus continues making his journey away from Hispaniola to find this alternate route to India and China. All right. Now, remember, he would have tried to do some repairs on the ships, because remember, one of his ships would have needed repairs. He goes to the western tip of Cuba, and I'm assuming maybe he may have met the Guanahatabi people that we spoke about in episode 3, so you could check that out. All right. Then Columbus decides to sail south, directly south from Cuba, and he ends up at the coast of he ends up at the Central American Caribbean coastline. And he sails along the entire coastline. But despite that, a passage to the east was not found. I always laugh at this because I always say if the Panama Canal was existing in those days, he would have had an easy time. But, anyway, a passage to the east was not found. So guess what? In 1503, in April 1503, Columbus said, boy, I give up. And he sets course for Santo Domingo again, although he's not supposed to go there. But he's trying to make it back to Spain. So he goes to Cuba, he makes a journey across the southern coast of Cuba, and then he arrives at Jamaica. Now, something interesting is going to happen here. He decides, last time he went to Jamaica, he sailed along the southern coast, and he would have made some friends with the local Taino people there. And they actually held him in good regard. They even remembered him and held him in good regard, all right? Now, Columbus and his men had lost 2 ships by the time they arrived at Jamaica. Because it wasn't just that hurricane, it was other storms they encountered. And the other 2 ships, you can remember, he came with 4 ships. So 2 were destroyed, and the other 2, they were in poor condition. So when he arrived at St. Anne's Bay along the northern coast of Jamaica, he had to run the ships aground to prevent them from sinking. Because what happened is that along with the storms, the ships got an infestation of worms. So worms were actually eating the lumber and so on, which was a huge problem. Now, Columbus and his crew remained on Jamaica marooned for over a year. And the native Taino people initially developed a good relationship with Columbus, as I just mentioned, from his first trip, but the Spanish began stealing from the Taino and attacking them. So therefore, they refused to help the men out initially. But Columbus, he was a little smart here, a little cunning action more like. What happened is that Columbus knew of an incoming, I think it was a lunar eclipse. It was a lunar eclipse, right? He was going to kill the moon. And they were like, what? But when the eclipse happened, they thought that he was actually doing that. So they started now feeding the men. All right. They started feeding the Spanish men. So they were able to stay alive like that. Now, one of the men, of the Spanish men, he took it upon himself to borrow a Taino canoe and paddle, as you can see via the arrow here, all the way to Hispaniola in a canoe. All right, okay. All right. As a result, help was able to come and rescue Columbus and his men in the year 1504 in the month of June. And then now he was able to sail out of the Caribbean for the very last time in June 1504, arriving in Spain by November 1504. Now, soon after Columbus's return to Spain, Queen Isabella died, and King Ferdinand, he was not interested in funding any more voyages for Columbus to embark on, so he ignored Columbus's request of receiving the riches of the islands that he, Columbus, felt he was entitled to. The thing, though, is Columbus was sick. While being marooned on Jamaica, he got really sick. And even before that, he was really showing symptoms of a serious sickness. And just 2 years after his arrival in Spain, Christopher Columbus, on May the 20th, 1506, he died. So the legacy of Christopher Columbus, well, he was a skillful and courageous navigator. He was a failure as an administrator, though. He was also ruthless in his treatment of the local Taino people, who initially treated him and his men well. His voyages opened the doors to further discovery and conquest by European powers. The European identity was promoted as the ultimate power, even being reflected in maps where Europe was now placed at the center of the map instead of Jerusalem, like how it used to be done. And to say that Christopher Columbus discovered the places he encountered, it would be incorrect. But however, he did discover them as the first European to encounter such lands. So he discovered them from a European standpoint. But it's better to say he explored them. All right? And his voyages and conquest of the seas, they are commendable. And you see, Christopher Columbus could have had a better reputation, but his impact left a bad stain. A stain that was soon developed into a full-fledged soiling that was about to spread through the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere. And those are the voyages of Christopher Columbus. Now tune in for our next episode where we will look at the indigenous peoples and Europeans, and we will look specifically at their impact on each other. So I want to thank you for coming once again to another history class produced by Island Uplift. I hope to see you in the next one, but for now, class dismissed.